It is a great joy to welcome you to our public lecture tonight here at St Bart's, and big welcome to everyone joining us online tonight as well. My name is Adam Lowe, I'm on the team here, and we really do count it as the greatest privilege to welcome you along, that together we might explore a really important topic, not just for us, but actually an important topic for our whole world. In a moment, I'm going to invite Stephen up, our guest speaker, and a little bit of an opportunity if you get to know him a little bit before he shares with us. But just a few important housekeeping things for tonight. It would be really helpful that if you have a phone that you've got that on silent so that we don't have any disruptions during the night, but if you can switch that to silent, that'd be a great help. Also, in the event of an emergency, we will let you know if we need to evacuate the building, but just so you do know, there are emergency exits at either side or straight through these back doors. After the talk tonight, there's going to be an opportunity for a live Q&A. And this is a real treat, and so thankful, Stephen, that you're willing to have a live Q&A as well. And so what that means is that there will be some roaming mics, so you can ask questions off the floor, but you can lodge a question online on a poll online, or you can upvote other questions that people put there as well. So if you'd like to do that, you can post those questions at any time tonight. So you can do that during the talk as well. So if a question pops into your mind during the talk, pop it on to Slido. So you can just go to stbarts.com.au/poll, or you can scan the QR code that's up on the screen, and that way you can lodge your question, you can vote for other questions, but really great way to engage in the conversation tonight. So I really encourage you to do that. After the talk and after our Q&A, there's going to be lots of opportunity to catch up and have some in-person conversation too. But really want to encourage those online tonight, you can participate in asking questions as well. So feel free to pop your questions into the chat or just follow to the poll. I'd love to welcome Stephen up the front. So would you like to put your hands together and welcome Stephen?
Thank you, Adam. How are you?
So, Stephen, it really is such a privilege. So thankful that you're joining with us tonight, and also you're joining with us on Sunday here at St Bart's as well. But it'd be great to get to know you a little better. And all these questions, Stephen has not had forward notice, okay? So that makes it a bit more, bit more fun. So yeah. The goal is to be surprised for Stephen, not shocked. So that's where I'm pitching. But actually, this is your first time. So you arrived late last night, but your first time ever in Toowoomba.
Yep.
So tell us, what do you love so far? It is a leading question, but what do you love so far?
It feels like the musician on the back of their guitar, they've got to say the name of the town. Hello.
Yeah, that's right.
I actually love the town because I didn't expect a regional town to be so pretty at this sort of... I've been to Queensland before in different places, but I woke up this morning, looked outside and went, wow, look at the main street of town, it's beautiful. And then just driving around, beautiful streets, houses, you're a little bit higher up in elevation, so it feels a little cooler. But it's just got a great vibe, yeah? I mean, you're all living here, so I guess you would think that. So I don't want to have to say, start the car if I say something wrong, but it's got a nice feel to it. And it's got grand old buildings that you've looked after. I'm from Perth, we just knocked those down. You know, that's the problem.
Now, you are originally from Northern Ireland.
I am.
You have spent most of your life in Perth.
Mm-hmm.
You have just had a small stint in New Zealand.
I have.
But you're settling in the East Coast in Sydney now for this next chapter.
Yep, Toowoomba actually.
Toowoomba, well, look, that's my great hope for this evening. But as you said, you're set in Sydney in this chapter. What are you looking forward to in this new chapter?
Yeah, interesting. Part of it is because most of my work is on the East Coast, being away from family, as in my wife and my son and my daughter, has been hard. I'm looking forward to kind of grappling with some of the issues that I'm dealing with tonight, working in a lot of the Christian schools, dealing with issues of how do you be Christian in a secular setting, how do you live as a Christian in a world that's probably not as Christian as it was, but also looking forward to Sydney, actually. I don't mind that, as long as there's somewhere quiet-ish in Sydney that you can live, because it is a busy place. I've just done 3 months in Christchurch, which is not the busiest place in the world, but I'm looking forward to that aspect of it. And sort of being on the East Coast and not having to, I think I had 75 flights last year, and a lot of that is over the ground, just looking down at nothing, and that was hard. So I'm looking forward to that changing.
Now, you've been a bit under the weather the last couple of weeks, so I know you haven't been able to run, but you are an avid runner.
Avid.
Now, I started running last year not by choice really, but I was compelled to start doing it. And I only find it slightly less unpleasant than what I did 12 months ago. What do you love about running? What drives you to run?
The fierce competition, partly competition, because I like racing, running in races, and I'm moderately okay at that. But part of it is about the mind clearingness of running by yourself without any music or sound or podcasts and just running. So I did 28 kilometres in the mountains in New Zealand the other week, and it was 0 degrees, and it's just amazing. But even in a busy city, you can kind of lock in to just your own thoughts and not get run over. That'd be another good thing not to do. Different to cycling, which you're a cyclist. Running, you could just put your shoes on, put on a t-shirt and shorts, and off you go. And you spend a lot on shoes, though, I think. Yeah.
Final question.
And physio. Yeah.
Well, final question for this section, because we're going to have a lot more questions after the talk, of course. You write profusely, actually, in many places. That includes blogging. You have written chapters. You speak a lot as well in a whole range of different settings. But you also write books. We have your most recent book, Future Proof, on sale tonight. But I wonder that as you write, what do you most hope for by investing this time, this energy, which I presume at times feels hard as well, writing books?
It does.
What are you really hoping for, the outcome, as you write and publish?
That's a good question. I guess a couple of things. That what I write brings clarity to a messy situation in our modern world, and perhaps clears the fog of war a little bit. So some of the things I write about the cultural churn we're going through, one thing people come up to me and say is, oh, you articulated something that I could feel, but I wasn't able to say, and it sort of laid it out a little bit. So I think if I have any superpower in what I do, it's probably been able to take the complex things and break it down to simple components, not just for information, but so that you can use that to, help yourself as you go through life, as you figure out what it means to be a Christian, if you are one, if you're not one, to say, what does Christianity offer? Where are we going spiritually in our culture? Those sorts of things. So I've really enjoyed being able to write in such a way that people say, oh yeah, I get what you're saying, and that makes a little bit of sense. I enjoy that. Yeah.
Well, I'm so appreciative of how you deploy your gifts and your time and your energy, really for the benefit of so many others, not least for you joining us tonight as we explore the question of why are we so anxious in this age of self-reliance. So would you please put your hands together and welcome Stephen.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Well, I'll have a few slides to go through as we have a look at things. We've called this Cool News, You're on Your Own Now. Why are we so anxious in an age of self-reliance? And it is true that we live in an anxious age. 3 years ago was the Olympics, not 4. If anyone can recall that we had the Olympics in 2021. And we were watching a particularly exciting race at our house, probably the 1,500 metres, the men's. And my wife decided to interrupt me and have a long conversation, probably longer than the race was going to be. And she said, and she's a clinical psychologist, and she said to me, which is brutal, really, because she knew that I wanted to watch this race. Anxiety is the gold medal podium winner of mental health at the moment. Bar none. Anxiety is the gold medal of mental health. It seems to be ravaging us. And 3 years later, the Olympics comes round again, and it seems no different. It feels we've trained for anxiety to be the gold medal winner once again. And that, part of that seems incongruent to the fact that we live in an age of self-reliance, as we're going to look at, the you do you life that we can live in this world, where we have so many opportunities for experiences that we want to have. The experience bucket in our cultural moment is full. You can do anything you want to do, really, if you have enough money and time and consent, because consent seems to be the only bar, the only restriction in our cultural moment. But it seems that the meaning and purpose bucket is quite empty. It's got a hole in the bottom of it. The people are not sure why we're doing what we're doing, or why we're allowed to, or why we should or shouldn't. And often, all of these experiences that we have don't add up to much other than anxiety for many people. I wonder if anxiety will be the gold medal winner in 4 years' time, the next Olympics. It would seem to be that we live in an anxious age. And tonight I want to rove across a few philosophers and speakers and thinkers and writers about the issue of anxiety, looking at it from a Christian framework. Perhaps you're not a Christian here today, that's fine, that's welcome along. But I want to look at it from how does a Christian framework speak into some of these anxiety issues as well, and how does that help us as we go through life? And so I had a lot of philosophers to choose from, so I picked a great American philosopher-poet to begin with, Taylor Swift. You laugh. But she speaks, doesn't she, for so many people. I'm sure there are people here who went or wanted to go. You don't have to show me your hands. But Taylor Swift gave the commencement address in 2022 at New York University. Fancy that. So this is someone who's no slouch. This is someone who the New York University knew speaks for a young crowd. She thinks like they think. She writes songs in ways that they listen to. And she said this in her speech to the brightest, wealthiest, safest students on the planet, New York University. How do I give advice to this many people about their life choices? I won't. Scary news is you're on your own now. Cool news is you're on your own now. Now you can go online and get the full transcript of that speech. And what is really interesting about the speech is that much of it, to the brightest, wealthiest, safest students on the planet, is keep your nose above the waterline. It's tough out there on your own. Be careful. Survive. Now, the year I was born, 1967, if you had given the same commencement address at New York University to the brightest, wealthiest, safest people on the planet about just keep your nose above the waterline, it's tough out there, you would have probably been scorned off campus. Because in 1967, the tune might have been more along the lines, reach for the stars, which 2 years later, of course, they did. 1969. It would have been a together we can do this kind of speech. And here we are in 2022 onwards, 1 year after one Olympics, 2 years before the next. Scary out there. It's cool out there. Both mean that you're on your own. So let's look at the cool news aspect of that for a little while, because we do live in an age that's self-reliant in many respects, the age of what is called expressive individualism, a term coined by late sociologist Robert Bellah. Cool news is you're on your own now. Central to our understanding of ourselves in a psychological age is this idea of we are on our own. We kind of are looking out from this, like behind this visor of self at the world out there. We are on our own. And it's cool news because often that whole idea of you do you, which we'll look at, is painted against a picture of a past of repressive, cloying, overbearing expectations of a community or an institution, an authority figure. The water we swim in now in our cultural moment is the expressive individualism world, the you do you world. That's just the way it is. We've had a couple of generations of that. Now that is in the West, we have to admit, because we have other cultures that come to a Western setting and are quite shocked by what they see. I can't get into an Uber without a young, either a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or someone from sub-Saharan Africa asking me questions about what I believe and often saying, I don't get some of the things that go on in your cultural moment. I can put it that way. But you're always anxious. You worry about everything. You have everything. You work too hard. You don't do family life the way we would. All these sorts of things. Sometimes it takes another person looking into the window of our culture for us to understand it. Cool news is you're on your own now. And we're in that moment, I think, where we're in a shift from what a writer and philosopher in an American called Dale Kuhn, in a book called Sex and the I World, about relationships beyond the age of individualism. He compares what he calls the T world, or the traditional world of the past, with what he calls the I world. So a traditional world where people are doing things more thickly within community, where what the community thinks is the preference for how you should behave, versus the I world, which sort of speaks for itself, doesn't it, in many respects? And he says we're in this tussle at the moment between the T world and the I world. Puts it this way: personal relational choice is replacing the T world's relational matrix as the preferred path to human freedom and fulfillment. The T world has been replaced by the I world. And he said the T world is based upon relationships of mutual obligation, and the I world is predicated upon relationships of personal choice. And he says they are oil and water, that we are moving away from relationships of mutual obligation in how we do community life to relationships of atomized personal choice. These are two competing views of the world. And both of them see themselves as the preferred path to human freedom and fulfillment. That freedom in the T world is about how you do life together in community. And freedom in the I world is how you express yourself from your psychological self to the world out there. But I think Dale Kuhn is right. The T world is being replaced by the I world. And it would be easy to say, well, then we've got to stop reading those books which tell us about, we should be living for the I. But that's not how culture works. The way culture works is that it's caught as much as it's taught. Your reflexive thinking isn't shaped by you sitting down poring over a study guide to how do I live in the I world, or why should I reject the T world? It's just caught. Each of us is discipled, so to speak, into the view of the world that we have. Now, Rory Shiner, well, that's not Rory Shiner, Rory Shiner looks better than that, but is just as smiley. He wrote this article in the Gospel Coalition website around the issue of expressive individualism. And he says these words: "We are not argued into expressive individualism. We are formed into it. To live in modern Australia is to be part of a relentless discipleship program. Every Pixar and Disney film, every graduation speech, every new novel and Netflix series is 100% on point. Your purpose in life is to find the true inner you and then to express that to the world. That's the point of your life. Find out who you really are internally. We live in a psychological age, which is why we live in an anxious age. And my wife is a clinician. So, there's good money to be had in an anxious age, so, let's not get out of it too quickly. I'm being facetious. But what is interesting is that if in all of this opportunity we have to make expressive hay in the individual age while the sun shines, my wife is booked out with anxiety, with issues. Not just personal anxiety. I think if you do have personal anxiety issues, you should go and see a clinician. But there's a societal anxiety that people cannot articulate. But Rory is right. We catch these things. We are not argued into the you're on your own now. We're formed into it. Every Pixar, every Disney film. It's you do you. It's follow your heart. It's don't let that tea world determine the course of your life because it will crush you. And it always ends where, in the movie, where they have released themselves into the I world. But it doesn't say too much about the end results of that. And then we are shaped by our practices. And then our practices become the things we love, and the things we love become the things that we assume are the only way to do life. You see, we are not driven in the public sphere of or even our private lives by French philosophy, which says, man is born free but everywhere finds himself in chains, as Rousseau said. And those were the chains in Rousseau's mind of government and religion and marriage in particular for Rousseau. But the people producing the movies and the thinking are steeped in that. You don't read Rousseau, you watch Frozen. That's the way it is. That's how we catch things. And everything in our cultural moment is shaped towards that. Now I want to show you two photographs of tea world and I world at the apex of the pyramid of our cultural times. This is the last picture taken of the Queen before she died. 2 days before. One Elizabeth who'd been reigning for a long time met another Elizabeth who reigned for 47 days as the Prime Minister of the UK. This is a classic example, the Queen, of the tea world, the world of duty and service and subsuming self. And it was interesting that when the Queen died, we celebrated that as a kind of lost world. We celebrated it even though we realised that the death of the Queen was a line drawn under that kind of way of looking at the world as the default. Even as we avoid it ourselves. Well, the interesting thing about the Queen's funeral too was that she chose every song, every reading to sort of thumb her nose at a modernist way of looking at the world. But it was her funeral was the last real big moment, I think, in our culture of a celebration of that tea world. And there's no going back at some level. We're not going back to the 1950s. It's just not going to happen. And would we want to? For all of those of us who go, well, we should have more of a traditional world. My mum grew up in the 50s in Northern Ireland in a very strict household. And it wasn't a lot of fun for her. Even as we try to avoid it, we celebrate it. But how did the Queen become the Queen? Well, she became the Queen because her dad was the king. But why was her dad the king? Because her dad's brother, David, or Edward, as his regent name was, abdicated the throne. It was a prime example of the tea world and the I world coming into conflict. Edward, fell in love with a divorced American socialite, Wallace Simpson, whose husband was still alive, ex-husband was still alive. And the Crown, the government, and the people would not countenance that. Duty, please, Edward. And Edward went no and abdicated. And his brother became king. And hence we have the Queen. The tea world took ascendancy at that point. The Queen died. This is our new king and his queen. Divorced, husband still alive. Celebrated by the Crown, the government, and the people. Now, this is not a value judgment. This is just saying, how different are the worlds? How different things have moved in 50 or 60 years of our cultural moment. And in fact, listening to the King's speech compared to the Queen's speech, you already see the shift in the dynamic at Christmas time as the King spoke. So there's this huge shift in how our cultural moment is put together. Now, not everyone's thinking about the King or the Queen when they do their own lives. Most of us, in our Western setting, are just going, how can I get along in my life and just survive and enjoy as much as I can and not get hit by too much bad stuff? I think that's probably most people in their lives. How do I do the relationships I want? How do I avoid the bad stuff? How do I manage? Here's a picture of a holiday that my family had. It looks like it's an amazing place in Europe. It isn't. It's in Western Australia. It's called Mindarie Keys, or the Mindarie Marina. And about 30 years ago, it was a wasteland of a blowy coastal bit of Western Australia. We couldn't actually swim on the beach, and you still can't because it's too dangerous. So we went for a holiday there, obviously, summer holiday. Now, this is looking out the back door of the place we rented, and there's this beautiful marina, and it's quiet and tranquil. And you can see the rocks up in the corner of it where the marina comes round, protecting that area from the wind and waves which batter that part of the coast. And one day, my wife and I went down to one of the beautiful cafes and the pub down there. It was just full of heaving with people. And it was just fun. And I said, this is probably what Australian life looks like, on heaven on a stick. No one's thinking too much about whatever the rest of their week. This is what life's like. And probably people aren't thinking about church on Sunday. Apart from us here of all these 1,000 people, does anyone think about Jesus, for example? Who he is? What he's about? It's about, can I eke enough pleasure out of this thing called life for 80 years? As much pleasure for as long as I can. And Mindarie Marina will do that for you. Every Australian, I think, generally, is trying to carve out a Mindarie Marina life for themselves. That's not to say a value judgment, that's just the way things are. And in one sense, it works. We don't have the traditional world that says you must do things this way. We go, no, we can do things our own way for a while. Why would we want to go back to that? The cultural moment we're living in is very much about the autonomous self. You're on your own and it's cool news. The problem with that, of course, is that it starts to present things that we hadn't thought about. Who would have thought about that? That somehow this great idea that we're going to live for ourselves in an age of expressive individualism where the decisions we make for ourselves cannot be challenged by some sort of tradition or framework. But it has real-time consequences. Now, here's one of them. This is a comment by Tom Holland. Now, if you're under 30 here, you're expecting to see a guy in blue and red spandex called Spider-Man. Sorry, it's a historian, Tom Holland. And I'm going to read this to you because you can't see it on the screen. But Tom Holland is very interested in Christianity as someone who dabbles on the edges of it as a historian. And he found a tweet which is really interesting. And he writes, "Now, this really is post-Christian." And it's a tweet which talks about the new Canadian survey on attitudes to euthanasia. In Canada, last year, 27% of the population think people should have access to euthanasia because of poverty, which rises to 41% among 18 to 34-year-olds who think that. 28% think that there should be access to euthanasia for homelessness. 43% for mental illness, and 50%, rising to 60% among 18 to 34-year-olds, for people with a disability. And you might think, brave new world, that's bad. But people aren't thinking you should have access to those things because we just want to be a dystopian zombie apocalypse future where we're killing everyone. This is the end of extreme autonomy. That you should be able to make that decision for yourself, regardless of a community framework. This is extreme individualism brought to its ultimate conclusion. And why does Tom Holland call it post-Christian? Well, he says it was Christianity that gave a framework of how we are to look after the weaker, the lesser, in our culture. That's part of what it means to not be on our own. In the Netherlands in May, a young woman at 29 years of age was allowed state-sanctioned suicide at the age of 29 for mental illness. Not because the culture was trying to be brutal, because it was celebrating her autonomy. It's an interesting implication in Holland, Tom Holland, that he realizes that that's post-Christian. That corporate ethics, looking after the whole and the weak in the whole, is central to Christianity. And Robert Bellah, the late sociologist who coined the term expressive individualism, said that just at the moment we're realizing the sanctity of the individual above anything, we're starting to lose the frameworks and structures that could keep individuals together. What is interesting about these statistics, and it's something I write about in my book Future Proof, is that each of these areas, disability, mental illness, homelessness, poverty, the percentage of those who approve of euthanasia ramps up among the 18 to 34-year-olds. And in 30 years' time, the 18 to 34-year-olds now will be the people who set the cultural tone in the West. I just assume that those figures will keep rising. Our autonomous culture has got a beautiful apocalypse. It's not a zombie apocalypse, it's a beautiful facade. Expressive individualism, do what you want, but we will not put together a structure in our community that will stop things like this happening. We don't have the language or framework to do so. Tom Holland did not necessarily believe that Jesus rose from the dead, because he's not there yet as a historian. But he said the Christians did, and it changed how they did life. Roman life in the first century was brutish. It was about power. And the community of Jesus followers changed how they did life. It became a much more community not based on tribe, not based on power, but based on love that drew people together, that was based on serving and forgiving, things like that. So you can see that what our culture offers us, in many ways it's good, you can do what you want, has a cost, a deep cost to it. Which is why, in one sense, scary news is you're on your own now. Many writers are pointing this out. My doppelganger, Alan O. Noble his name is, or I call him O. Noble Alan, because it sounds so noble to be called O. Noble Alan. He's got a book which deals with all of these issues called You Are Not Your Own, Living for God in an Inhuman World. And he says this: everyone is on their own private journey of self-discovery and self-expression, so that at times modern life feels like billions of people in the same room shouting their own name so that everyone else knows they exist and who they are, which is a fairly accurate description of social media. Now, in one sense, we laugh about that, especially those of us who are not digital natives. But the 18 to 34-year-olds of this culture are going to be those who, in the end, see the deepest expressions of how social media and immersive technologies will take you into your own. And Alan Noble says this is an exhausting process, to always live as an individual before the rest of the world, but having to sort of shout your own name to show that you matter, that you exist. Another great writer on this is Tara Isabella Burton. She says this: our economic, cultural, and personal lives are suffused with the notion that we can and should transform ourselves into modern-day deities, simultaneously living works of art to be admired by others and ingeniously productive economic machines. What she's saying is that our ecosystem of our culture reinforces this idea that we are our own, that we are simply there to express ourselves to the world and want the world to like the expression that we give. And we do that all over the place, and technology is aiding that. And the question is Amish the only option to get out of that? Just shave my lip and I'm there to go. Is there a certain level of technology that we need to stop at? Well, I don't think we live in that world. We live in a world that we live in. We cannot go back in a time machine to the 1950s. But much of this is what has led to the huge rise of personal and cultural anxiety. Am I good enough? Am I doing enough? Am I missing out on something in how I'm going? It's exhausting. And it's interesting in my wife's practice, the one cohort that she sees often are young women about the age of 23 who went to very good schools. And they come to see her upset and anxious because every graduation speech they went to said, "You're going to do amazing. You can be anything you want." And the boyfriend that they had at the time was charming. And at 23, 5 or 6 years later, the boyfriend hasn't been so charming. They've been through a few difficult relationships. And that job that was going to provide hasn't quite materialized. Or it has, and it's crushing them with the expectation as they compare themselves unfavorably to others. It's like pulled the expressive individual handle and it broke off at some stage. And they're going, what do I do now? How do I move forward in life? That's why Tim Keller, the late Tim Keller, writing in an article in The Atlantic, his last article before he died, the New York pastor and writer and thinker, he wrote this: the modern self is exceptionally fragile. Here's the issue, he says. While having the freedom to define and validate oneself is superficially liberating, it is also exhausting. You and you alone must create and sustain your identity. And then he says this: this has contributed to unprecedented levels of depression and anxiety and never satisfied longings for affirmation. That's the problem. It's fragile and it's tiring. And we've lived in an era where everyone got a trophy for about 3 generations of school, right? Everyone was affirmed because we said, if we affirm you all the time, you will feel affirmed. And guess what? Guess how much affirmation is enough? Just a little bit more. That's our problem. I'm not sure of myself, but I need you to be sure. And it's tiring. And Tim Keller said, we will reach a point where that's going to break. The article is actually entitled Why He Thinks That Revival is Due in America in the Church. Even while the tide of church attendance goes out, he said, well, tides come back in. There's something about the way Jesus' community can do life that can show us a way forward through this affirmation. And the stats bear out what Tim Keller says here in Australia. The Australian Bureau of Statistics from 2021, just under 40% of 16 to 24-year-old Australians, that's 1.1 million people, reported having a mental disorder in 2021, far higher than the overall proportion of 21.4% for all Australian adults. Well, double, actually, percentage-wise. Huge issue of anxiety and mental health issues. And granted, we have the language to describe that, a younger cohort does, but there's something going on. As I said, not much has changed between the Olympics. Not much at all. But let's go back to Mindarie for a little while. No, it was great, by the way. It was a great holiday. Loved it. What was interesting, though, was that the back door was the main door, because the front door of that apartment we stayed in, every time I went to open it, it almost blew in my face. It was salt encrusted on one side. So it felt like a TARDIS. You go in this tiny little door at the front, but at the back it was like this. It was constant windy. It was waves everywhere. The sign on the beach said, "Do not swim here." And we crafted this marina. And if you could just shape yourselves that way, away from all that turmoil, you can somehow craft a life for yourself, a Mindarie marina life. Here's the thing about the wind and the waves. Every now and then in your life, a rogue wave will sweep over the top of your Mindarie marina. That's Australia. Cannot avoid disappointment, loss, breakdown in relationship, job loss, ill health. A wave is coming. It is not all expressive individualism, hey, while the sun shines. We need more than that, because a wind will sweep over us, or a wave will smash over the rocks of turmoil, trouble, and loss. Part of our anxiety in our culture is that people don't know what to do with that when it happens. They don't know where to park it. And what's been interesting the last 5 years is seeing a growth in those same philosophers at elite level who were telling us, live for you, this is all there is, changing their tune. Not all of them, and not fully. But the conversation has certainly arisen because of the anxieties of our age. This is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, famous thinker, writer, speaker, philosopher, good friend of Richard Dawkins, the atheist scientist who wrote The God Delusion. She was once a Muslim who became an atheist and wrote an article, also in The Atlantic, entitled, "Why I'm Now a Christian." And he was like, whoa, say what? Richard Dawkins would not believe it. No, you can't be a Christian. And she wrote this article to say, there's something missing in our world, our Western world is tearing itself apart. It's anxious. We should have everything. We've been given everything, and we don't know where we're going. There's a change in the air at the cultural elite level. She saw the crisis in the West, but then she saw the crisis in herself. Richard Dawkins, 20 years ago, with Polly Toynbee, another well-known atheist writer in the UK, had launched the slogan on the side of buses in London. There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life. Yet here we are, not enjoying it. A world in the West riven by tribalism, political problems, and leadership scandal. So Richard Dawkins decided that he would sit down in a public meeting with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and convince her that she hadn't become a Christian. And by the end of the lecture, he said this, "I came here prepared to persuade you, Ayaan, that you are not a Christian. I think you are a Christian, and I think Christianity is nonsense. But she saw something missing in the framework. And that's at elite level. Here's another thinker for you. Russell Brand, enfant terrible. The man who had everything and everyone, if you believe the papers, who 4 months ago got baptised in the Thames River after doing an alpha program. If you've seen any of his Netflix comedy series, shame on you. They're all, funny but rude. The man who had everything, including 10 different addictions, as he put it. And he had an interesting journey away from self. And he says this is months before he became a Christian. People are cynical about the increasing interest in Christianity and the return to God. But to me, it's obvious. And he literally pretty much said what so many theologians and have been quoted as saying, a comment attributed to another secular writer, David Foster Wallace, at another commencement service, that everyone worships. There's no such thing as an atheist. Everyone worships. And a good enough reason to worship God or some spiritual being, he said, is that anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money, you'll never have enough. If you worship sex and your looks, you'll always feel ugly. And you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you in the ground, he said. Go make a difference, Imagine hearing that at your commencement address. But Russell Brand listed the ways that he had put himself, the autonomous self, on the throne of his life and how it had led to every addiction and every abuse of other people, and it was starting to destroy him. There's an interest in Christianity again. The tide's coming in an anxious age. James Marriott, who looks about 12, but I don't know what his skincare regime is, but look, he's in his 30s and he's very smart and he writes for the Times of London, James Marriott. And he's often written about the secular age we live in and the progress we're making until recently. He said, we may look back on the high point of secularism as a phenomenon peculiar to an age that hubristically believed itself to be at the end of history. We've arrived. The autonomous self is the future of the world. Why can't everyone get on board? An affluent, self-confident, and relatively monocultural society that now, he says, belongs to the past. Religion hasn't gone away, he said. He walked past his local Anglican church, a little old building, hundreds of years old, and he opened the door on a Sunday night expecting to see 4 people, and it was full of young people praising God together in community. He expected autonomy, the secular frame of you do you, to liberate us, and it hadn't. He thought that the secular story would slough off all those crazy views about the spirituality and the need for this and the need for that, and it didn't. And he now says that self-confident, affluent, and relatively monocultural society now belongs to the past. You do you isn't working. But let me finish with a personal story of my own church experience, of the church that we go to in Perth. Providence Church in Perth has 3 congregations, or 3 churches. I used to be the pastor of one of them. And every year they have the gathering of all 3 churches where they have the best music team for the, from all the church. And if you're not on the stage, that you're not on the best music team, And we have a great preacher. Usually our senior pastor is a great preacher. And my friend, and afterwards there's food on the lawn and stalls and people are selling the things they've been able to make, and it's just fantastic. There's music, like that great music we had tonight. And my friend Ollie came up to me, who I hadn't seen for a while, and he said, "I want to introduce you to someone." I said, "Okay." He said, "This is Claire. Claire's just become a Christian." I put on my Terminator 2, Arnie Terminator 2 glasses to scan her to see, really? Now, Ollie works as the chief designer for all of the Westfield Shopping Centre outfittings in Australia. It's a creative industry. He said, "Claire works for me. She's part of my team." So here before me was a 40-year-old creative industry, white, Western, well-educated, wealthy woman. I said, "You don't become Christian. People like you don't become Christian. Why?" I was trying to convince her she wasn't, I said, "How did you become a Christian?" And she said, "Look, I just felt there was something wrong, but I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't figure out this low-grade anxiety I had that was just sitting there. And I was trying all these different things. I should have everything sorted." Look, her husband and her kids were with her, and her husband wasn't a Christian at this stage, and she's happily married. Oh, this doesn't make sense. The tide of Christianity is going out. It's you do you society. Why are you becoming a Christian? I said, "So how did it happen?" She said, "Well, during COVID, everyone was anxious about losing their job, except Ollie. He wasn't anxious. So I asked him, 'What's your thing?' And he said he was a Christian. And she goes, 'Oh, the Bible?' He goes, 'Yeah.' He said, 'Oh, maybe I could have a Bible.' He goes, 'Oh, yeah, you can have a Bible. And maybe you could read it I could read it with you at lunchtime if you want.' And he said, a few months later, I said, can I go to church? He said, 'Oh, you can come to church with our family.' I came to church, and I said, 'Then what happened? Was there a bolt of lightning?' 'Oh, I just became a Christian.' Made sense. And I went, this is ridiculous, And then I used to be a journalist, a writer. We've talked about that. So I asked a good, hard journalistic question. How does it feel? And she said, "It feels light. Feels like a burden's rolled off me." I went, wow, that's big. And then because I was a great journalist in the past, I asked another follow-up question. It was a sucker punch. How else does it feel? I didn't have anything else. That was it. And she said this: "It feels like I don't need the approval of other people anymore if Jesus approves of me. It feels like I don't have to go around being and presenting myself to a world that could or could not accept me based on my performance. If Jesus approves of me, that's enough." Liberating. And she doesn't run off and become Amish. She works. She does her job, not to seek the approval of other people, because she's liberated to do it for other people. That's the difference. If it is about you, then everything you do, even the things you present to other people as good, are ultimately about you. The freedom you have to do life for other people only comes when your approval is locked away. That if Jesus approves of me, I can serve you freely in community. And that's why I say to people, why not revisit or visit for the first time the Christian faith? What it does, who it's about, how it liberates, how it frees us from anxiety. Because ultimately, we are not built for self-reliance. We are not our own. There's a restless churn, a burden within us. And I've quoted many modern writers today, but St. Augustine says this: "To God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." We were never intended to be on our own or for our own. And the cool news is We don't have to be. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Now, remember, you can keep putting your questions now, even as we do the Q&A, and there's going to be a couple of our ushers with microphones. If you'd like to ask a question off the floor, if you pop up your hand, then eventually one of the ushers will find you and you'll be able to ask your question. And if you're online, you can also join in, and remember, you can look and vote up questions that you see already on the poll. But we'll start with a hard-hitting question, Stephen.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you have a favourite Taylor Swift song?
Do I have a? I probably don't. They all sound. There was. I have to say, I'm a Harry Styles fan above a Taylor Swift fan, and we did go to the Harry Styles concert. So there you go. So, if that's the wrong answer to someone out here, I promise you, I'll go and Spotify every song too.
Look, if you're here in person, you can always follow up and ask Stephen after over some hot chocolate afterwards as well. What do you think are the best parts of expressive individualism? Or do you think there are any good parts of expressive individualism?
Look, I'm going to say this. I do not want to go back to absolutely everything that was in the past, because here's the thing. A traditional community can crush you, and did crush people. Crushed my mum badly, and very badly. So I was staying at a friend's place in Melbourne, and his Indian background, Shabu, and I met his parents. I stayed at his parents' house, and they'd been married for 52 years, and they met 2 weeks before they got married, and it was arranged, and ain't nobody got time for that, right? So we're saying we like choice. There are certain things that a traditional society often push to conformity on people that you've got to be very careful about. The pendulum swings the other way, and we're all going to do what we want to do. Somewhere in the middle, there has to be a freedom within the context of community. So I don't think expressive individualism is all bad, but when it's untethered, I think that's the problem. It's a bit like anything that's untethered from its main purpose. It can destroy itself. So when it's the goal, I think it's problematic. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Can a sense of connectedness exist in the I world? Mm-hmm. Why or why not?
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible. And I would say this, and I've spoken to a lot of younger people. Well, most people are younger than me these days, it seems. But all of our technologies just don't do terrible things. They do good things as well. There are technologies that, and some of our social media technologies can be anything used for good or for ill. People are finding ways to do community differently. I think one of the problems is that we've become very tribal in identity issues, and so we have a cancel culture. What keeps individuals working together well is a deep understanding of forgiveness. And a couple of things there. Tim Keller wrote a book, his last book, called Forgive. How can I and why should I? We live and Douglas Murray, who's not a Christian, an English thinker, says we have a culture where there's no understanding of redemption or restoration. And so if you don't have that in an individualistic or in any ecosystem, you fracture pretty quickly because you don't have a way back. That's why we have a cancel culture going on. There's no way back. You can say sorry all you like, but it's hard to come back. Christianity gave forgiveness to the world, and I think it's the forgiveness framework that holds communities together. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and everyone else can check in afterwards as well or ask another question.
Yeah.
Pick up on some of the threads that you've just raised. You're pretty active on social media.
Yeah. Funny.
So wonder what you might find helpful or less than helpful about engaging in that space in terms of worldviews, point of views, exploration of ideas. What's helpful and unhelpful?
What's been helpful for me, I was a late adopter to a lot of technologies, I think, but I heard a great young woman speaking in Adelaide earlier this week who, it's her world, as in she grew up in it, and she swims in that. And how do you redeem things is what I would say, is how do you use those well? So, for example, and I'm not particularly good at it, but I started doing Instagram reels of about 90 seconds long. about John's Gospel, for example, just to give myself a little bit of a heads up on some of the things I was preaching. And I just threw them out into the ether. And like some of them were 20, 30,000 people viewing them. That's a bit crazy. But what was interesting, my son, who's not a reader, all his mates at school who aren't Christian, follow me on Instagram and listen to them. I was like, but I'm not cool. I'm old, you know. And, hey. So I don't think the technologies themselves are the problems. It's how we use them. So, and I've seen great examples of technology used well to bring people together. So it's what's at the heart of it. I think that's the thing. But social media rewards bad behaviour, and if you can slay someone else with it and get, views, that's problematic because it shows that you are. I think that's the thin end of the wedge of the autonomy thing working poorly. But it can be used well, and I think the church can use it well and think about what does it look like to have a grace-filled approach to how we use social medias. How do we encourage each other and build people up and bring them together in an atomized world?
Wasn't expressive individualism the basis of the Greco-Roman era? Isn't it inevitable that we return to it since its philosophy underpins our culture still?
Yeah. Was it? In one sense, it wasn't, because I think it was power was how you did things in the ancient world. Your tribe was important, and the gospel actually broke down some of the big barriers, because in Galatians 5, Galatians we're talking about there's no Jew or Greek or male or female or slave or free. You're all one in Christ. And that wasn't saying that there's no differences between you, but it was saying that those aren't the barriers that define you. Christ does. The ancient world had a huge code of how things were done. Maybe expressive individualism was fine if you were the wealthy elite, but no, people didn't live like that. It was very much about tribe and position, and you don't break those boundaries. You didn't move between your stations. You stayed in your station, much more than perhaps we would see. So if you see a modern day movie about, the Robin Hood era, and it's all that's nonsense. That's not how life was lived. It was very stratified in how you did things. So I think we are returning to a bit more of a pagan perspective of humans, but I don't think that was necessarily an individualistic age in the same way that we would think it was today. Somehow.
So what were some of the countercultural ways that Christians in that era really demonstrated a different worldview outwardly?
Well, you see it in the response by some of their opponents who write at one stage lamenting that these Christians not only look after their own sick and poor, but they look after ours. What's wrong with us? Well, you don't have a framework of thinking because you're about power, and Christianity was about serving and forgiveness. So Christianity at difficult times, and this is probably what I would say, it shone brightly in an era of brutalism by being gentle. In an era of, of power, it shone brightly by being servants. So I think in an age of hyper-individualism, we can do well by saying, let's show the world what community looks like. Now, can I give you an example of this?
Please.
It's running. Did I tell people I run? Runners always tell you run. No. Just to check my Strava. No, please. Yeah.
Don't just check it.
Yeah, don't just check it. Give me some kudos. That's right. I have a running friend who I've run thousands of kilometres with, Gillian, training for marathons, and she's a lapsed Irish Catholic. And she said to me one day, just after COVID, I envy you Christians, right, for this long run, 35 Ks. You get to speak about a lot of things in life with people when you're running. Trust me, you do. You're not always out of breath. And I said, you can't envy us Christians. You're a lapsed Irish Catholic. You've got to hate us. And she goes, no. The way you seem to do community life just naturally during COVID and the way you cared for each other, I've never seen anything like that. I said, what about your other run groups that you belong to? Because the run group we belonged to was connected to a church. She said, it's not the same. I said, why isn't it the same? She said, I don't know. I said, I'll tell you why. Forgiveness. That's at the center of our culture as Christians. And I said, what would happen if you fell out with the people in your other run clubs? She said, it's done. There's no way back. And I said, well, I'll hold you to that. Sure enough, 2 years later, she gets on the phone and her other coach from her other run club's on the phone as well with me. They've all fallen out with each other. No way back. So at the start of races, they're standing here on the start line and the other guys are standing over here. The chasm between them can't be bridged. And they just atomize. And C.S. Lewis's view of hell in The Great Divorce is people living in a village who can't get on with each other. So they move to a house further out and further out. And hell is just this long, eternal floating away from anyone else. That's hellish, isn't it? And it starts now in the run club where they've moved a step away from each other. I think that's part of the issue, that Christianity gives us the opportunity to restore that.
So remember, you can keep the questions coming. So if you want to go to the website to put a question on, you can. You can just go to stbarts.com.au/poll and pop the questions up there or vote for questions.
I'll try to answer them quicker, sorry.
Oh no, don't feel any obligation to rush through, Stephen. But you can pop more questions up on that link. What do you think are the best ways to help create a sense of connectedness in our communities? And do Christians have a unique opportunity or obligation in this?
Look, I think we're made in God's image, so I think that Christian or not, there's something in us that compels us to want to be with other people, as much as the cultural frame pushes us away from difference, I suppose. So I think we have an obligation in the sense that the Christian message has been, and it is, Paul says it, welcome one another as God in Christ has welcomed you. You know, who do I welcome? Well, you welcome the person that Christ has welcomed. But they're not like me. They're not from the same tribe. They're a slave and I'm a freeman. Or they're a woman and I'm a man in a patriarchal... No. Welcome each other as Christ has. So I think there's big obligation. There's big opportunity because I think that Christianity, by the power of God's Spirit, empowers us to change and welcome people who aren't like us. And I think that's been something, that's our superpower as Christians. We need to lean into it a little bit. But if you go to a church building and everyone is there and you go, they're all the same and they're all here because they're from the same background, then something's maybe not quite, that's not Christianity as much as it's just conformity at some level. But when you say, these people wouldn't be here except for the fact that they're all Christian, they wouldn't be friends with each other, I think that starts to change things. And then you're free, because it's not all about you, to serve others at cost to yourself. I think that's part of where Christianity works. I don't need the trade-off of your approval in order to serve you. I don't need you to approve of me. I just need to serve you and love you. I think that's helpful. Yeah.
Many of your thoughts are controversial and likely to be attacked by other Christian leaders.
All right, that's news to me.
How do you deal with criticism and controversy of viewpoints?
I read the comments and sleep like a baby, which means I cry all night, right? Yeah. Now, I have had to navigate that space because I have to say it's quite confronting when people say things against you. And one post I wrote last year, 300 pieces of hate, to be honest, and it was hard. But I'm not seeking my approval from other people. Now, here's the thing I would say. If you're going to write or speak in the public square, you've got to constantly have a big view of God. I'm not saying I'm amazing at that, but I have to keep coming back to God is big. That does two things. It means everyone else isn't big, so I'm afraid of them. But they're not small either, so I despise them. It's very easy on social media, because I've got a sharp tongue, to just cut someone down. But I'm not supposed to. If God's big, other people aren't too big, so I fear them, and they're not too small, so I despise them. They're the right size, human size, like me. So I engage them as someone created in God's image. I think part of the safety net of Christianity is that the other person who opposes you is made in God's image. And God takes them as seriously as a created image bearer of His as He takes me. And that has to counter how I engage with someone who disagrees with me. And then cry all night. But I think that's critical.
Have there been people in your life along the way who have helped you in seeing who Jesus is and keeping walking with Jesus?
Yeah, probably too many to count. I think being married to my wife, my wife is a great godly lady. My parents divorced when I was 17. From a Christian perspective, it blew our family out of the water. It just almost destroyed us. My dad left, and that was it. One of the things that helped me at 17 were people, men who were a bit older, 40, who just helped. How you going? It was the community of God's people together that actually helped. It was very brutal to lose that framework. And just having older people who are able to get alongside us was critical. So I think that's been the case. There's been a couple of older guys who got alongside me and were just able to encourage me. And I think what the Bible has said is, older men, younger women, older women, how you do communal life together can be really sweet. And that the lesser parts of the body are looked after by the greater parts of the body. The body life of the church kicks into gear in times like that. And for me, growing up in quite a traumatic, it was very traumatic for us, that was helpful. So there have been many writers and thinkers along the way that I kind of think in my mind too. I read those people and think those things that those people have thought. So, yeah.
Wow. Many Christians seem to experience the same kind of anxiousness. Does that mean that they have failed in some way?
No. Doesn't. Doesn't mean that at all. One of the theological things that we have to understand is the difference between something that is sinful and part of what it means to be broken. That we're not there yet. And that we're born with certain proclivities and ways that might lead us toward anxiety. The great thing we have in the scriptures is it says, cast all your cares upon him, all your anxieties, for he cares for you. It doesn't say, how dare you sinner have anxieties. It goes, you've got a good place to bring them. Now that doesn't mean you won't always be anxious, but it does say, in my anxiety, I have someone I can bring those anxieties to. And I'm an anxiety machine. I'm looking for a house in Sydney. We're moving over from Western Australia. I'm 30. No, I'm not. There's how anxious I feel. But I go, I just want to cast my cares upon him. And my mum is 80 this year and has been by herself, single mum at 40 with 4 kids, and she's had many anxiety-inducing moments. But the key in her life is that she just casts them upon Jesus. And for 40 years she has. And I would say she's been a bit of a hero of mine, my own mum, for those reasons. So I want to encourage you. We can be anxious. My wife is a clinician, and she would kick to the curb any idea that somehow that's a sinful thing all the time, this anxiety thing, and say, let's see how in community life together under Jesus we can help each other bring our anxieties, and also partly bring them to each other. Your brothers and sisters in church want to help you with those things.
It's really special.
Thanks, Ed.
It's wonderful to have a hero and not an anti-hero as well, I should add.
Yeah, it's true.
Continuing on with that thread, and I think our final question for tonight, what do you think Jesus would want to say to someone who perhaps doesn't yet count themselves as a Christian, but what do you think he would want to say to someone who does feel weighed down, who does feel burdened, and perhaps doesn't even know where to begin?
Well, the first thing he would say is you're a lot closer to resolving that, because it's the awareness of it that's the key issue, I think. And that Jesus himself said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." He says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He's not saying that there isn't something to carry, but it's a different carrying. And what is amazing about Jesus in the Bible is that when people come to him self-righteous and but when people come to him with nothing and broken, he holds them. And I've been a Christian for nearly 50 years. I remember it as a kid, becoming a Christian. That whole deciding thing, the age of 8, after, a lifetime of crime and drugs and prison, And I think the key thing for me is every point I've had to go, Jesus knows and understands me better than I know and understand myself. And I'm not coming to him going, I'm really anxious about this, Jesus. Were you? I had no clue. No, he knew that. So I think your creator, Jesus is also your creator according to the Bible, and he knows you inside out. It wouldn't be a great thing to go to the one who created you and say, "I can't make sense of this." And he goes, "I've got a lifetime with you to sort that out." And here's the other thing. One of my favourite verses at the moment is in Revelation, where it says that God will wipe away every tear from your eyes. That's deeply personal. What started in the garden in the story of Adam and Eve, where God breathes into the nostrils of a human, ends with him going, "Will someone get an angel down to..." No. He takes the Kleenex, he comes down and he wipes the tear from our eyes. That's the end of anxiety in the Bible, when it just works and God's there. And that's our hope. Yeah.
Stephen, you have been so generous. Thank you so much for sharing with us and answering all those questions. Would you like to put your hands together and thank Stephen?
Thank you, Adam. Yeah.
I really do hope that you have enjoyed the talk and also the questions as well. If we didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry about that, but I'm sure the opportunity to continue the conversation if you're here in the foyer afterwards as well, so I really encourage you to do that. If tonight has got you thinking and you have some questions and you would love to explore them more, we would love to invite you to connect. A really great way to connect is by completing a Next Steps card. So these are available in our foyer, or you can complete one online. So you can just go to stbarts.com.au/next steps or scan the QR code. And that is the same if you're joining us online as well. And you can just pop down some details and you can say you're interested in exploring who Jesus is more, or you've got questions, you'd love to chat with someone. Whatever may be helpful for you, we would love to assist. We would love to serve you in that way. And so it can begin simply by completing one of those cards, and then one of the team will be in contact. So I really encourage you to do that. Another really fantastic way to explore the big questions of life, wherever you might be at, is also through a great course that we offer here called Alpha. And Stephen actually mentioned Alpha as well. Russell Brand did Alpha, so that's a pretty great endorsement. And so we've got one coming up later in the year, starts on October 7. And I want to encourage you might want to think about that. And if you're interested, you can have a chat to someone in the foyer or complete a Next Steps card, or actually you can just go straight to our website and register there. But I've got a little video to share all about Alpha.
Questions. Is there more to life than this? Why am I here? Who is Jesus? At Alpha, you can ask anything around a table with people just like you who have questions about life, faith, and meaning. There's a seat for you at the table. Find your nearest Alpha today.
So our next Alpha starts on October 7 with a launch party. It's a great night, great food, and terrific opportunity to hear what Alpha is all about, and there's no obligation. Come along on that night and go, no, that's not for me. Or you can say, yeah, I'd like to keep on checking it out. So that starts Monday, October 7. So if you're interested, please register. You can just go to stbarts.com.au/alpha. I'd also love to invite you that if you're not connected with a church, whether or not you count yourself as a Christian or not, love to invite you along on a Sunday here at St Bart's. We have 3 services on a Sunday, 7:30, 9:30 and 6 p.m. And it's a really great opportunity to come along this Sunday because not only will you hear Stephen speak again, but we are just in the beginning of a whole new series exploring the whole question of identity of who am I? And in particular, we're approaching this topic by considering how the good news of Jesus really can transform every aspect of our identity. And so this Sunday, we're going to be exploring the whole topic of am I my achievements? So pertinent for our society, for our culture, for our world. And you'd be so welcome to join in with us. So 7:30, 9:30 and 6 p.m. here at St Bart's. And you can also join us online for those joining us online for those 2 morning services as well. So really love to invite you along.
Well, as you head out tonight and go to the foyer, there's a number of other ways you can dive in deeper of the topics that we've been exploring tonight. So we've got 2 great books recommended by Stephen and 1 written by Stephen. So The World Next Door is a great way to start looking at the Christian faith, what it's all about, how to find yourself and why looking inward is not the answer. Also, really fantastic book to dive into questions around identity. And finally, you might find Stephen's own book, Future Proof, a really great further deep dive of all the different things he's been talking about tonight. So you can find them all just on the table as you go out, and the team there would love to have a chat with you.
So please do stay around afterwards. You're so welcome to join us. There's free hot chocolate, tea, slice as well, and lots of great space in the foyer and outside as well. It's actually a nice evening, so much warmer than a week ago. So please do stay around. We'd love to continue the conversation. You can have a look at one of those Next Steps card or check out the bookstore, but really encourage you to do that. Once again, we are so thankful. We feel so privileged for the opportunity to have you join with us tonight. So thank you so much for joining with us, and really would love to invite you that if you ever have any questions or you would love to explore any of the things that we've considered tonight or many other things as well, then we would love to help you with that. We'd love to serve you as well in those ways. So always feel free, please, to reach out. All of the resources for tonight will be online as well, so if you want to rewatch later on, if you want to have another look, please you can check out our website. But if you've registered, we'll send out an email as well, and you'll get a link to all of those in the coming days. So please do stay afterwards, and just as we finish, I'd just love to pray for us. Gracious God, we do thank you so much for this night. We thank you for the gift of one another, and that we can meet here in person and online. Lord, we thank you that we are created in your image, and we thank you that you welcome us and you invite us to come to you, that we might bring all of our burdens to you, and that we might know that in Jesus we're enough. So Lord, thank you for your love, your grace, your forgiveness, and your mercy. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do join us in the foyer for some refreshments and check out the bookstore.